Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, everybody. We're delighted to have you on our little podcast, listening to all the little insights that we have to give over here. Super excited to introduce you to today's guest. And with that, I want to give her as much time to give as much wisdom as she has to all of you in our show today. And so on today's episode of Mindful Management, we are delighted to welcome Candace Wallace, a seasoned consultant, coach, and the visionary founder of Seeds of Life Consulting. With nearly 2 decades of experience across the public and private sectors, Candace has dedicated her career to developing and implementing health equity-centric initiatives. Her work is deeply rooted in trauma-informed practice and community resilience strategies. As a certified trauma-informed coach, Candace excels in servant leadership and is passionate about fostering organizational growth and advancing civic engagement. Join us as we explore her insights on cultivating a whole person approach to community health and her strategies for promoting rest and recovery among trauma-informed practitioners. Candace, I am delighted to have you with us today.
I am grateful and pleased to be here. And thank you for that warm welcome. That was beautiful.
Candace, you have extensive experience in the trauma-informed practice. You clearly have a deep commitment to community health, but can you tell us maybe what started you on that journey or sparked your passion for holistic health solutions?
Yeah, so 2 promptings. One was work. So being in the field of public health for many years, designing and executing federally and state-funded projects, you work on all sorts of health conditions and disparities, right? From heart disease to stroke to HIV to just all the things that causes early mortality and poor health outcomes. I began to start to do some healing work and self-discovery work. And I'm like, that's it. That's what we're missing. We are not looking at trauma. We're not looking at the whole person. We typically only look at isolated issues.
Yeah, in this case for you, the isolated disease, right? Like the hypertension, HIV, heart disease, to your point, versus are there some things that maybe led to that condition as well?
Absolutely. Like, what are the root causes? And I know we have work around ACEs and, adverse childhood experiences, adverse community environments, so we have great research to reflect upon.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece for our listeners to hear because many of our listeners are going to be familiar with adverse childhood experiences and ACEs and Candace in that process. And listen, ACEs told us, right? We know scores of 4 or more likely to die 20 years before your peers, all else being the same. Like when you talk about that mortality piece, we know the research exists because of ACEs and subsequent research. But what sparked you and where did you decide that rest became particularly crucial, especially for those working in high trauma environments? How did or why did rest particularly become crucial for you, especially as it applies to those working in high trauma environments?
Absolutely, because when I started to look at the resilience element, which is ultimately the goal, right? We want to address the trauma so that we can promote resilience. I looked at just the scope and the process of such, and it can't exist outside of rest. Wellness cannot exist outside of rest.
Such a crucial, did something happen? And I'm just wondering if you don't mind sharing, like what happened with you where you thought rest is the thing, and then you could see it in that much global picture?
Yeah, so part of it was the pandemic. So I was doing the work prior to COVID, but then the pandemic sat us down and I was continuing the work, just personal application, but also a lot of study. And when you start looking at the regulation of the nervous system, right, and like triggers and being dysregulated, and part of being dysregulated is not resting, is not taking the time to sit. So for me, it really started with honoring like stillness and solitude, which I think we were all forced to embrace if we could during COVID. But then utilizing that time to really build that regimen of rest. But I think the more you explore rest, you start to see it as dimensional, multidimensional, because rest is not just stillness and solitude, but I think that it is the core of resting well.
And I think that ties into, I mean, I talk about this all the time as busyness as a trauma response. Because I think most of us try to, like, when we think about trauma responses, right, we think about the person literally fighting the neighbor, the coworker, the whoever, right? Like, we think about fighters all the time in that way. And I've always thought about busyness as a trauma response, sort of to your point, is like, in order to not be alone with my thoughts, in order to not feel that stillness, if I occupy myself in whether it's public health or child welfare or any number of human service jobs that exist and many other jobs, teachers, etc., it's very easy to fill your mind with others' problems.
Because you feel like, okay, well, I'm doing social good, you know, servicing others well, but all the time you're really not looking at that duality of how you are harming yourself. Self kind of goes to the back burner if self even exists for you, because for some, they can't even see themselves healthy, whole, resilient, cared for, and etc. It's just more natural to pour out versus taking that time to pour in. So I think when we take the time to rest and we're resting properly, we get to assess and examine those voids and gaps within our lives and say, okay, this is what I need.
So, what are common signs, maybe for our listeners, Candace, that you could tell them to watch out for to indicate that they might be neglecting their need for rest?
So first, I would say you kind of hit it on the head or kicked it off with busyness. So if you look at a 24-hour period, right, over the course of a week, which could easily lead into a month, but if there is no carved out time for you to sit and just be with yourself in whatever fashion you desire, then that means you are not resting well. I do think that the body has a way of telling us over time. So I would say start with sleep. How are you sleeping? Because whether we're getting 6 hours or less or 7 hours or more, we're all going to lay down at some point. So let that be maybe the first indicator of how well you're resting is just by monitoring your sleep.
That is a great starting point. But are there other places we can find rest that don't equate to just sleeping or napping? Because I think sometimes people think that's what rest just means, is like I'm asleep or I've taken a nap or something. But I think you have a much more broader definition of rest. And so, are there other places we could search for moments to rest as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's 7 domains of rest, you know, spiritual rest, creative rest, sensory rest, mental, emotional rest, physical rest. So when we say sleep, that falls under that physical rest, but physical rest is passive, but it's also active. So passive is to sleep, right? Or to nap. But, you know, that active form of physical rest would be stretching or walking or that sort of thing. So when we're looking at indicators as to if you need to lean more into rest or improve that practice, look at your mood.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you have, in your experience, maybe some of the most effective strategies for integrating rest into your routine?
I'm just real big on sleep. So I'm going to always come back to sleep because I am just passionate about the power of sleep. But I would also look at the course of your day and are you breaking for lunch? Even lunch, you know, how many of us are actually stopping for a lunch break? Look at, you know, how we're inundated with virtual engagement. You know, we have, and social rest is a thing too. But if we're even looking at sensory rest, the virtual piece, we're in and out of virtual meetings to the point where some don't even have time to get a bio break in between. So what does rest looks like in between meetings? Do you give yourself 10 to 15 minutes pause?
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, Candace. One of the things we've tried in our office, because listen, I manage a fully remote team, is we actually try to start our inter-office meetings at either quarter after or quarter to the hour, right? So, because what we know is like most meetings are going to run from 1 to 2 p.m., let's say, right? But if we then say, oh, our meeting runs from 2 to 3, to your point, there's nothing built in. But when we started saying, great, our meeting runs from 2:15 till 3:15, then somebody's not going to schedule a meeting until probably 3:30, right? Like this idea in your meeting before is going to have to end or it's not going to work for you. And we've just found like building those bumpers for ourselves makes it so we don't overbook ourselves.
Yeah, it does. It starts with us. And if we can build that boundary with us and respect it, then we can showcase that to others. But it does first start with us. So I agree. And I think that's admirable that you see your staff as humans, right? And you're looking at their welfare and their well-being and not just the end goal of what we need to produce today. You're not retaining people. Um, folks are burned out. They may value the work, they may value the mission, but the working conditions are not conducive. And there's beauty in 9 to 5 work. There's beauty in working for an organization, but it's also your health and your well-being. And I think that's another thing that came up with COVID. We got a chance to see the mental and emotional weights that we have been carrying. And during the time of solitude and quarantine, we were able to release them. And when it was time for us to get back to the things, we knew that we could not show up the way that we had left.
So we know that rest on some level is a personal choice. Like you have to do some personal things. There's personal ownership in that. But I also imagine that there's a role organizations play in supporting and or hindering rest. Can you maybe share some ways in which, because I know we have a ton of leaders who are listening because they care about their staff. They deeply want their staff to be healthy. They deeply care about their wellness. And I think there's always some of that push and pull between how do I support that and how do we still get the work done?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, create space for your staff to voice what they need. So be intentional about asking, not just like water cooler, how are you doing today? But in performance evals, in huddles, in check-ins, and getting that consensus. So when there is time to modify or augment policy, you know that you're coming in representing authentic voice from what you've heard and what you know that your employees, your staff, what they need. So first, let's not assume what they need, but create space and ask them.
I love that. I'm going to add one of my own tips as well, which is you also have to lead by example. I can just think of hundreds of leaders, and Candace, I'm sure that you've seen this as well in your career, that say, and who I know deeply care about their staff's wellness, let me say. But when you ask them, have you taken lunch this month? Like this month, right? They'll be like, no, we never take lunch. And I'm like, that is setting the tone of the organizational policy, whether formal or informal, around rest, right? And about taking care of ourselves. So like we look to our leaders and we begin to mimic their behavior. So if we want people to prioritize wellness, it means we have to also prioritize our wellness.
Absolutely, which means it has to be authentic.
Yes.
It can't be a checkbox approach. Like, I know it's a thing. I keep hearing it socially.
Can you talk about challenges that you've seen, Candace, when people are trying to prioritize rest and well-being? Anything that sticks out, common things that you've seen, and any recommendations for overcoming those obstacles?
Yeah, so I think that we see challenges. There's in institutions. I think we see it in society as a whole, and I think we see it in family systems because honoring rest is all about perception. And depending on how you've been brought up, in what community, in what familial framework, you could be, seen as lazy or unproductive or all sorts of things. So I think that depending on the dynamic that you're confronted with or who you may be speaking with at that time could depend on what comes up. Right?
So you said that word, which I'm sure has been floating in other people's minds, which is laziness. Because I think that's a big one, right? Which like, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, there it is. Like, there's that feeling, right?
You have to think for those who are either learning to practice or are practicing well and have been doing so for some time, we all know that you've had to work through the guilt and the shame of stepping away, disconnecting, saying no, placing the boundary to do the very thing that you know you feel you need for yourself. But where does that guilt and shame comes from? It comes from the systems and the perceptions in spaces that have not embraced the concept.
Yeah, and I think this is a place that organizations really could start as a conversation around this, because one of the things I ask teams quite frequently is, how do you tap out? Like, we can know about ACEs, we can know about neuroscience, we can be doing the best trauma informed practice. Like, we can have all the thoughts and knowledge and all of those great pieces. But Candace, if you and I are on a team and you get triggered or I get triggered, how do I get to say, hey, I need a minute, without everyone on my team saying she just wants to get out of her work? And I'm just thinking about, it happened in football recently, like, because I'm a big football player, and a quarterback like tapped his helmet and said, I'm tired. And the whole next morning, everybody was like, you don't get to say you're tired in the middle of a game. And I was like, it was such an interesting conversation, like, of listening to what they were saying, but believing in what you're talking about as well. And I was like, it's because they haven't actually had the conversation of, how do you tell people you're tired?
What does rest look like for you? Or how do you know when you need rest? Like, what's an indicator? What does that look like? I know how you define rest, or what dimension of rest you gravitate towards more, or when you feel like you need that, right? Then it gives me some insight into when you behave this way, or when you may specify that you need it. I know those things because we've had some baseline conversation.
Yeah, the relationship, right, Candace? Like, we have to have the relationship first.
Well, and I don't want to deviate too far from the topic, but I think there's this correlation between monetary reward or monetary gain and access or production, right? So the fact that you're being paid X doesn't qualify you to be tired or unavailable. And we can see, if we use that analogy of football and put that in corporate settings, but the reality is that rest is not to be rewarded. It is a human right. It is essential. If you think about how we as individuals perceive rest, we reward ourselves with vacation. Like, because I'm going on vacation, like, oh, it's no big deal. I can plow through, I can do all the things endlessly because I'm going on vacation next month. Well, vacation isn't a practical rest regimen. Like, how often are you vacationing? Like, there has to be some more practical means that you've incorporated on a day to day. So when you look at the definition of wellness, it talks about daily practices. So what are you doing daily to cultivate rest and regulation?
It was such a big one because I remember during COVID, one of the things so many people said when I was running wellness webinars was, I miss my commute. And not the I miss being stuck in traffic part of my commute. I miss that was the time to be with just me. And so when I hear you say that, and just for our listeners, it's like, where can you find those moments of rest, right? Like, it doesn't always have to look the same, but to your point, what's your daily practice? Because you can't go on vacation every week.
No, and as I'm listening to you speak, I feel like a big part is for us to be honest with ourselves about what it is that we need, what it is that we desire, and feel safe and vulnerable enough to share that with whomever you might be doing life with. So if that's a significant other, if that's your children, or, your colleagues, your, faith-based community, whomever, like, you have to be okay with communicating what it is that you need. Because if we're in a relationship and we both work from home, I may need to step away to go get coffee by myself. That does not mean that I don't love you. But when I step away from this computer after 3 Zooms, I just don't want to talk to anyone. And that's what I need in this moment. And I will bring you a cup back, maybe. But if I don't, do not charge it to my heart or my brain. This is just what I need to show up for myself. So I do think it's a lot of being aware of what we need, and 2, being confident and comfortable enough to communicate that.
Yeah, I think we understand the importance of the rest practice, but the impact of effectiveness and longevity, because we know, especially whether it's public health, Candace, or again, almost any career at this point, that the stress is making people just say, I'm going to go do something else. So how can rest help us with not only our effectiveness, but our longevity in our career?
Yeah. So when I think about the longevity piece and at work, I would say start off with your personal practice and be able to start having those conversations at work if you feel like it's a high stress environment, because it could be work that you truly love and enjoy. And some will say, well, I can't have that conversation at work. It may be fear that's standing in your way of how you'll be perceived. Will they feel you're qualified? Are you worthy of the jobs? I think sometimes that's to do more type of mentality. I can't do less, or I can't just do my job within scope because they're going to think I'm not qualified. But I would say you have to have the conversation with not HR, but your direct report or whomever you're doing life with. Like, tell them that you're more innovative, you're more equipped to do the work well when you're rested and when the work environment has this temperament. So, one, speak up at work. I think that would help longevity wise if it's place of employment where you want to stay. But I think it first starts with us finding out what works and being patient, because rest is a progressive process. There's absolutely no way you're going to get it right overnight. And you could be at an 8 at the top of the year and find yourself at a 4 mid year.
Yeah, that's such an important piece, is that it's something you got to constantly be looking at. It's not just, I've got the practice, I'm doing it, and I'm all good. Because I think at various times we're going to need more or less rest based on what's happening. And when I used to talk about this, right, I always talk about like what you need every day, what you need when you're triggered, and what do you need when you're in crisis mode. And what I found is that a lot of folks think, well, in crisis mode, I better hope I've got enough stored up energy to push me through the thing, right? Because now it's all hands on deck. We got to get through the crisis, whatever that is, a death, loss, job change, divorce, like whatever is happening, COVID. And I'm always like, that's actually the exact opposite. In crisis, you actually have to be resting more to re energize yourself, to give yourself enough energy to actually push forward. So, depending on what is happening in your day, week, month, year, you might have to reevaluate your practice as you go through. And at some points, you might need less, and at other points, you might need more.
For sure. And I think it's okay when, you know, we have these very short term stress moments, right? Because it puts us in high gear to do the things, right? We may have a big deadline or something coming up, or caregiving responsibility or whatever, and you do need to be in high alert. You do need to muster up that energy and alertness to accomplish the task. But then it's a matter of being able to switch gears and starting to come out of that state. But I think for many of us, because of the communities and spaces that we occupy, we are more so in that high gear, fight or flight posture than we are in that rest and digestive posture.
Yeah, it's so critical. So, you probably have something for each of these, but any books, techniques, or rituals, Candace, that you particularly recommend for people?
Yeah, so I'm real big on like prayer and meditation for sure. Really big on journaling. I feel like when we journal, that's an opportunity for us to, I think prayer, meditation, journaling are all good for our emotional and mental, because these are spaces and places where we can go and surrender and be completely transparent about what we're feeling and what we've experienced. I would also say diet is a big piece, right? What we're putting in our body, sugar, caffeine typically upticks us. So finding, you know, some of those healthier diets and practices that bring us more to a calmer state. Exercising, it's good. And, you know, exercising can be so taboo. It's like, I don't want to hear nothing else about exercising. But I feel like in the world of physical fitness and exercise, there is an activity for everybody. You got to find out what works for you.
Yeah, and I say this all the time, right? Whether that's chair yoga, like even like there are these very simple pieces that doesn't have to be you going to the gym lifting weights, that doesn't have to be you running a marathon. It doesn't have to be you like it can look like a lot of different things when you say exercise. It could be walking your dog.
For sure. And walking is a great tool. I remember like I would be in meetings sometimes, and if it would get too high energy, as soon as it would over, I would hit the door and go outside. just needed to walk. I needed to exert that energy. I needed to process what happened. And when I got back, I was at a state of regulation. Like I was able to have resets during that walking, like that physical activity. And when we rest, we do release those pleasurable brain chemicals. So endorphins and serotonin and all of that, like we find pleasure in rest. So exercise is linked there. I'm always going to go back to sleep. I would say being comfortable with taking a nap. If your body is telling you in midday that you just need to shut it down for 20 to 30, honor that, right? So napping is great. I would also say monitor your sensory input. Because for some, everything that we mentioned prior to is like, not my jam, or nope, I'm good in those areas. But look at your sensory intake around social media, TV, phone, all the things. Like we're being inundated with messaging all the time. So sometimes just to kind of put some boundaries around, at what point do you check your phone? Do you sleep with your phone? Do you get on your phone in the middle of the night, which is a thing, because it's in the bed? I've gone back to old school alarm clock. I do. I not only do I have an alarm clock, my son has an alarm clock. He's in middle school, so I make him check his cell phone in the kitchen. He has an old school cell phone, I mean, alarm clock. I set it, and the other morning I woke him up and he's like, "What happened to my alarm clock?" So it's like going back to just the basics. Get the electronics out of your room.
The other question I wanted to ask you about, and keeps coming up for us, and we've talked about it, is around financial trauma. Because especially, you talked about like, by the time this airs, will be over the election. Who knows where the economy will be? But I think financial pressure for a lot of people, they feel like they can't rest because of finances. Like, one more shift, one more overtime hour, one more, all of the things. And it's such a real piece. But I think sometimes if we just even speak it into a room, sometimes, like, there's a spot for financial rest as well.
Oh, for sure, because that is like, lack of better term, that's a lie. That is a complete falsehood that I think America has dealt, and many have bit the bait and believe that if I work more, if I do more, I'll get ahead, but you're exhausted. And what I would say to anyone that honors that ideology is that creativity is found in rest. And when you take time, it may not even be a regular practice yet, but if you just take time to step away and evaluate and explore your dreams, your desires, you'll be surprised at what you may be able to birth that's profitable. But when you're stuck in the rat race of fulfilling someone else's mission and their bottom line and their productivity goals, it does prevent you from ever seeing your greatest potential and desire. So that is, in fact, I would say, a falsehood. Really needs to be challenged on so many different fronts. But it's hard to come into that realization if you never take the time to step away to explore your own desires.
Yeah. And to rest, because how many people, I have a side hustle that has a side hustle that has a right? Like this mentality of more, 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 which again, filled by social media, filled by all the things and reasons that we talked about previously. I knew you were the right person to ask, Candace, about financial rest and what that looks like for folks.
So I'm going to also do a shameless plug. So Trisha Hersey, Rest is Resistance, is a phenomenal set of content. She has books, she has rest cards, but she talks about capitalism. She talks about white supremacy. She talks about how rest is resistance, and we resist the grind culture when we create space for ourselves to rest, and the beauties and the benefits that come out of honoring ourselves.
So we'll put a link to all of those resources in our show notes as well, Candace. Before we get to our quick fire questions, though, could you maybe share a piece of advice or for emerging trauma-informed practitioners about maintaining their own well-being while also in likely a demanding role?
I would say that honoring rest takes courage. And oftentimes when we're at work when we're in go mode, we are advocates as trauma-informed care practitioners.
Candace, it's been a pleasure having you on our show. I cannot wait to hear your answers to our quickfire questions. And so I'm just going to hop right in. What's the latest book or television show that you're consuming right now? And why should we also go consume it?
Okay, guilty pleasure. I'm watching Reasonable Doubt on very guilty pleasure. So I'll say that. Book-wise, I'm a bookie, super, super nerdy. I am reading Emotional Healthy Spirituality. That's a really good piece that says that we cannot grow spiritually if we are not emotionally healthy and well there. So that's a good one. I am also reading Discerning the Voice of God by Priscilla Shirer. So I'm a bookie. I could go on all day there.
If you could have dinner with a historical or contemporary leader, who would you choose? But as a coach, what's the one question you want to ask them?
Oh my gosh. That's such a great question. And it's a quick fire, so I should be ready. Who would I have dinner with? Oh my gosh. I don't know. I mean, there's so many. This is like so far-fetched, but I would say maybe Dick Gregory. That's so wild that I would even say him, but he was so vocal and had such deep and great like social and political insight that I think it could be both informative and entertaining to break bread and have a meal with him.
I love that. Tell us what the one hobby or activity that's just filling you with joy, like the thing that you could get lost in forever.
Oh my gosh, I love plants. So like I'm a plant mom and I love like my garden, like my yard work and all of that. I could easily get lost there. So I have like 30 house plants. I was one of those people that leaned into plants during the pandemic and got stuck with them. So like, I'm always telling myself not to buy anymore. So like planting, gardening, green thumbish stuff, like that's my jam.
We love it. Candace, again, thank you so much for being on the show, but tell our listeners, how can they get in contact with you? How can they learn more about you and your work as a coach and consultant at Seeds of Life Consulting?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at I am Candace Wallace. I am on Facebook as Candace Wallace. You'll see my profile picture. It's easy to find me. And then email-wise, I can be found at cwallace@seedsoflifeco.com.
Candace, we hope you'll join us again to talk more about rest and well-being in the future. For our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Mindful Management. For more resources, for links to Candace, her website, her email, all of her things, as well as all the books that she mentioned. And apparently we're all going to go watch Reasonable Doubts now as well. Please head into our show notes and check them out there. If you need more trauma-informed resources and tools, as always, you can head over to chefaloconsulting.com. If you've enjoyed today's episode, show your support by liking, commenting, following, and reviewing this episode on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us to reach more listeners and helps us to bring even better content your way. But we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube to share what topics you'd like us to cover or who you'd like to see as our next guest. Maybe it's you. We'd love to have you. We love to have our community members join us as guests and share their knowledge and insight with us. If you know someone who would make a great guest, we'd also love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. And remember, we can do hard things. And as the theme of our episode is today, go rest. Until next time, thank you so much. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.